Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the DLC Drop podcast. Today my guest is Ed Offterdinger, who is a very significant person in my professional story. He was the managing partner at Beers & Cutler, my very first office job. Well, today he's a co-author of the book Conscious, Capable, and Ready to Contribute, which shares that employee development can become the highest form of social contribution. Ed has a tremendous business story and a lot of insights on leadership. Let's talk to Ed. Drop in the untold stories of industry leaders, influencers, and insights on future innovation. I'm John Davidson, and this is the DLC Drop podcast. All right, welcome, Ed Offterdinger. It's my pleasure to have you here on the podcast. You are arguably maybe my most anticipated guest personally, so I appreciate you joining me.
Thank you for having me, John. I've been looking forward to it myself.
Absolutely. So for people who are listening to the podcast, a lot of people know my story that I was on this skateboard tour, I broke my ankle, I end up moving to Washington, D.C., where I know one person who said, John, you should go to a temp agency to try to find a job. And I said, what's a temp agency? Because I'm from this small farming town in Central California. And I go to this temp agency. I do my tests. They said, John, we'll call you in 3 to 5 days with an offer. Okay, I'm kind of bummed. I thought I was going to have the job the next day. I thought that's how it worked. I was a little naive. Signing my paperwork, about to leave this temp agency, literally opening the glass door to walk out, and this woman grabs me by the shoulder, says, John, do you want a job starting tomorrow? And I said, yes. Not what is it? Just, do they pay cash? And she said, well, it's this place called Beers & Cutler. And I thought, alcohol and knives, I'm in. And turns out that the name of the founders were Jim Beers and John Cutler, and it was a tax firm that I knew nothing about, but I quickly found out was one of the top 50 best places to work in D.C., voted one of the top 25 best managed firms in the United States, and the fastest growing independent tax firm in the nation. And the managing partner was our guest today, Ed Offterdinger. So, welcome.
Thank you. I remember it like it was yesterday.
Yeah, you remember it exactly how I do, right?
Pretty much, maybe.
So one thing that's, I just love putting a face to one of the people who was so instrumental in providing this amazing experience for me, because that was my first office job. And the result of working there for 2 years was I said, wait a minute, office jobs don't all suck. I've seen Office Space, but that's not every office. But I could have just as easily had my first temp office experience be a terrible place to work where people treated me terribly. But instead, it was this tremendous culture. There's probably more interesting work than tax, one could argue. I'm delivering mail. I'm cleaning out, conference rooms. I'm recovering the receptionist lunch hour. But everybody treated me with such respect. I got hired on. And the thing where I want to lead into the book here was you came down my last weekend there at BNC. And I was so touched because I thought it was so cool. Like, the guy at the top is coming to talk to the guy at the bottom. That was kind of how I saw it anyway. And it was so generous that you came and you said, John, thank you for your time here. I hear you're leaving us. And I said to you, Ed, when my name is on the building, what do I need to know? And I remember what you said is, John, it's all about the people. And we often spend more time in our lives with the people at work than we do even with our families. And there's a lot of talented people who apply to work here, but what's more important than smart, capable people is good people and that they fit into the culture. And that was something that has really shaped my trajectory into business. And so I'd love to just hand that over to you and get your take on that.
I think the first thing I would say is 17 years later, I feel like many of the things that are in the book and I talk about all the time are those things.
Yeah.
One thing that I remember very vividly about that time are some of the people that you worked with. People like Deb Smith and Vanita. And, we we called the client-facing people. So it was tax as well as consulting, the practice, that's the client-facing people.
Yeah.
And then we very intentionally, may remember this, decided that rather than call people admin and administration or overhead or infrastructure or all these great things like that, we call them practice support, because what we were trying to do was say everybody that's here is helping the client one way or another.
That's
and
right.
So when we sort of empowered you to do something that was really important, which was, at the time you thought, okay, I gotta, walk around and make sure the conference rooms are good and all this stuff. But that's a client experience thing, right? And you're all about client experience now. And you think those little things really, really make a big difference. We spent a ton of time on things like our core values and really thinking about what they really meant. In fact, at one point we thought maybe we'll have details matter as a core value, because it really is the sort of the little things. But I remember it was a great, growing, booming time. We thought we were geniuses. Of course, some of it was the economy was amazing, and the DC economy was really something special. But yeah, it was a fun time. And I'm looking at, I actually have the little card that we had for the core values, and it basically said hire the best and provide opportunities for growth. And I always believed that the one plan I had no idea how to manage was how to maintain. But growth is so much more fun. So how do we create those opportunities for people, even people who, coming off of a skateboarding tour, showed up for a temp job. So it was a wonderful time, and so many great friends, and it was so cool to see your success.
Well, I appreciate that. Something that's really stuck with me that I experienced at Beers and Cutler too was the Myers-Briggs class. I remember it like yesterday. I remember going in there, and I'm an ENFP, by the way. I haven't taken that test since I left Beers and Cutler, so I'm curious if that's changed at all. But I remember the things that struck me about that. One was I had it from the mindset of at work, because I think sometimes we can be different in work as opposed to outside of work. But number one, Beers and Cutler invested all this time in getting every single employee, I think it was about 300 employees at that time, to take, I don't know how many hours it was at least a 1 hour class.
Oh, sure.
And we, not only did we identify what we were, but we learned about what everybody else was like. And on our desks, next to our name tag, was our Myers-Briggs. And what was so cool about that, I think it was probably most effective for managers, but it was also effective just for colleagues, was I could walk up to anybody's desk and see their Myers-Briggs, and I would instantly know how to interact with them and what they respond to. Right. And now at attacks from the joke would be everybody's an ISTJ, but which is the exact opposite of me, coincidentally. But talk a little bit about why you did that and what the benefits were to the people in your workplace.
Yeah. Wow. What a great memory. I will tell you something funny right now. When I interview people, I play this little game with myself even today, which is if I'm going to spend more than a half hour with them and they've taken Myers-Briggs, which I always kind of work into my questions, I play a little game to see if I can deduce in a 30 to 45 minute period what they are, because and I'm usually right, because it's just very powerful. That is a great segue in a sense into the coaching world that I'm in, because in the late 90s, Jim Beers, very forward-thinking guy, and he realized, even though we were very small at the time, that it was worth investing in professional development for everybody. And that meant investing dollars, because these things aren't free. And so we brought a couple people in to help us. Dave McGuire, who ended up being my coach, which we may talk about, I imagine, Joe Courier. And then they recommended that we bring in a consultant, Mary Frestel, who married Cameron, now to Mary Frestel. And she brought Myers-Briggs to us. Now, the funny thing that preceded you is that she said, well, we got to start somewhere. So what we did was all the partners did Myers-Briggs. Now, the thing about Myers-Briggs, which is great, is it's a personality test. Yeah. These two ladies felt that there was sort of a fabric to life. There's 16 basic types. I have a book. I have books everywhere because that's the way I roll. So when I'm coaching, I'll frequently roll over and grab a book. And I have Type Talk at Work right over here to my right.
Say, Mary gave me that book. I still have it.
That's right. I'm staring at it. And I'm an INTJ, just for the record. But so that's probably why I got into management and got out of accounting. But anyway. But my partner, interestingly, Catherine, is an INFP, so very, very close to you.
I'm just a little louder at parties.
Correct. Also, the P part means we're kind of deciding things as we're walking in the door. And, my challenge is I decide too fast. So, but anyway, what we did was all the partners did, and I don't know if you ever heard this, but what we did next, Mary said, let's have all of your EAs do it, because the interaction every day between EAs and the partners. And then we obviously expanded out. All the interns did it, and it became a thing. And you nailed it. What it really is not, I jokingly used to say to people, oh, well, I used to think he was just nuts. Now I just realize he's wired differently. Yeah. And the power of being able to approach someone, with no judgment and recognizing that we're all just different. Wow. When you can harness that and recognizing that Catherine and me, for example, we are yin and yang, and what a powerful combo if you can sort of get over each other's differences. And that's part of why one of the things we believe in, obviously, is embracing differences or celebrating differences. So, but that was a really important thing. And I tell you, I have former interns talk about that all the time. So that's neat that you remember that.
Yeah, it's definitely stuck with me. And so what you're talking about there is you're investing in employees. You're investing in the people in your workplace. And that goes directly into the book here, which I have handy. And I was just on vacation in Portland last week with the family, and my entire plane ride over and back was spent just in this book. Number one, and I'm not just saying this because I'm talking to you, but I can't believe how great a read this was. Right before, for our listeners, right before we started recording, I said, Ed, did you write this yourself? This is amazing. But I didn't mean it in a negative way, but wow, what a read.
Thank you. And I will just credit the fact that I had help. Anytime, it ties right into the subject of my life. I worked with a coach. Imagine that. I always wanted to write fiction. I've been writing, I'm a writer at heart. My grandmother got me into reading. My mom was a big reader, but I always wanted to write fiction. But that's something I'd never done before. So I would say if I'm hiring myself out as a coach, I would be sort of foolish, right? Not to get some help. So it was great. And, I worked very hard in there. What do they say? All writing is rewriting.
There you go. Well, yeah, it definitely came through your effort. And to give people an idea of the book, essentially the core message here, if I have it correct, is the higher purpose that companies can have is investing in their people and then enabling them, empowering them to contribute to society. Do I have that accurately?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I would say this, that I've always known that investing in people would lead to the best business results. Okay. Yeah. So if you just want to be capitalist about it, that's sort of very obvious. And I'm not the only person that thinks that. Yeah. And then if you can go kind of the next step, that's really good for them as humans. And then that can be good for them. They go forth, it's good for your brand, et cetera. But ultimately, Catherine came up with the idea, well, what if the whole point of this maybe is that, maybe it's all about social contribution. Maybe if we empower people and we put that into the mission of the company, then maybe there's something bigger there. So.
Well, that really took me from a previous perspective I have with branding, sponsorship, and marketing, which is my world now in the esports world, to where you're going. And what I realized in my time with GameStop, PRG, these esports companies, is that brands have a ton of money, right? Way more than individuals. I've been in rooms where somebody said, I need to figure out how to spend $1 million before the end of the year. It's already allocated. It's like, holy crap, right? What could $1 million do in, another context or to help somebody? And so I've always said, if in marketing, which you could say is maybe a little bit of a lower purpose than societal contribution, but I always consult people to say, look, if you want to do great things, you want to do cool things, you want to do things that impact a community, engage brands and help them understand how to fund it in a way that results in ROI for them. So essentially saying brands, companies have a ton of money. If you want to do anything, it costs money. And so the bridge that your book helped take me to, and I'd love to get your take on this, is from my mindset, it was a marketing perspective. It was enhancing experiences. Brands have dollars to enhance experiences for audiences. But taking it a step further is saying, okay, if people are going to get invested in and developed, who is best set up with the resources that are required, a lot of those are financial, to develop these folks? And where are they spending the most time? Both of those answers is the company that they work for.
Right.
And so I think then it's opening the eyes of the company on why it makes sense to do that. And one thing that I really loved about your book is it wasn't easy in the book. There was a lot of pushback from characters in the book saying, wait a minute, Andrew, the CEO, you want to do all this fun, fuzzy, make you feel good, contribute to society stuff. We're in a crisis right now. We're losing clients. Our revenue is declining. We have all this turnover. And you want to do this fun, fuzzy stuff? We need to worry about revenue. And through this story, they work through that to understand that actually developing the people in your building contributes to revenue in addition to contributing to society.
Yes. Well, you clearly read the book. Thank you. There's some data that I would just point out first. So, as you know, because you've read it, I describe myself as a conscious capitalist, and I'm a part of Conscious Capitalism, and the publisher is Conscious Capitalism Press. And the reason I went there is that if you were to read Conscious Capitalism, the book, or the predecessor book called Firms of Endearment, I'm not sure I would have called it that, but literally over a 10-year period, the companies that you would describe as best places to work, who invested in people who you could see were doing more, they outperformed the S&P 8-1. It's so I don't know why anybody argues this point, other than we do live in a world of short-termism, because unfortunately, shareholders and institutions, live quarter to quarter, and if we could solve that problem, maybe that'll be the next book. I don't know, but I haven't figured that out yet. But if you're playing the long game, it's unequivocally smart to invest in your people long term, because they stay longer. And as at the beginning of How to Shift at the back of the book, there's the quote essentially says, build it so they'll come and love it and thrive, knowing that they may leave. So it's what they say about your company that matters if they do leave. So that's immensely branding point. You think about great employers, and the funny thing is, if you do it with that sort of detached mindset, people stay longer anyway. And it's just, and you saw, we've got some data in there too. What's it cost for, the cost of turnover is somewhere between 150 and 200% of 1 year annual salary.
Right.
So just imagine, and you remember when Andrew sort of has to convince some of the some of his partners, well, one of the ways you get some people is just show them the money. And it's really unequivocal if you do this stuff, and yet you got to be able to have the money to invest.
Right. And it's a lot, there's front-loaded investment that pays out long-term. And what I love about really the argument with Conscious, Capable, and Ready to Contribute, which is the name of the book, is it's not just convincing people that they should care more about morality and society than money. It's saying when you invest in these things, there's also this benefit. So there's not necessarily a choice that has to be made. If there's any choice, it's more short term. But one thing that I really took from the book, and I've heard this throughout my business career, is think long term. You want to talk about long-term thinkers, Jeff Bezos is one that comes to mind, and it's hard to, criticize his business results. But can you share a little bit for our audience some insights on whether it's how to think long-term or the benefits of thinking long-term?
Yeah, for sure. When I was first tapped to be leader of Beers and Cutler, Jim Collins published his first book. He had a partner, and it was called Built to Last. And there are many, many great lessons in there that preceded Good to Great and whatnot. And one of them was the tyranny of or. There's a chapter, it's my favorite chapter in the book, that great companies, I think great leaders, great individuals, they don't live in a world of either or. It's an and the idea that the things you can find that that may benefit people may also benefit your profits, or you don't have to, it's not a trade-off, which is actually one of the fundamentals of conscious capitalism too, where you have a stakeholder mindset. There's no trade-offs. You can't make your company all about shareholder profits to the expense of your customers, to the expense of your people. Similarly, you can have a wonderful place to work, but if you do too much in that direction, and you forget
you don't have a place to work anymore.
You don't have a place to work, so you always have to balance things. Look, David Rubenstein is a fan of his. He started Carlyle, one of the founders of Carlyle, and he talks long term all the time. I think that the mindset towards thinking, here's a way I would answer it. So one of the things I ask every one of my clients to do, and this is individual coaching of CEOs, is I ask them to write me 2 papers, 2 pages. No more. The first one is no more than 2 pages, and that's what makes it hard. Your story up until now.
Oh wow, yeah.
So you think about after even a 15-year career, 2 pages. Wow, how do you get? Then the second paper is at the top of the page. They write in the next 10 years, and then they got to run with it. Because what I want to get them thinking about is a longer term, not at the end of 10 years, but what are those things you want to accomplish? If you just look at the great, great, great companies, remember Built to Last impacted me. None of the companies that were even studied, they all had to have been around 50 years or more. So Their mindset was all very, very long term. I don't know. It's one of those where I have a hard time explaining why it's important, because it's just in my DNA. I just know it is. Because you have to be willing, like you said, you have to be willing to say, okay, we could spend $100,000 on something other than, Myers-Briggs for all the interns and every employee and the training and all, and the fact that all of the partners had coaches. Holy smokes, you got to convince people who may be leaving next year, partners that may be retiring. No, this is good for the long term, but it's sort of unequivocal that, that's just what investments are, and they pay over time.
Well, one thing that I've seen in some of the places that I've worked is it's a kill the closest snake mentality is what we have. It's like, oh, there's this problem. Snake. And you're just looking at the problems that pop up when the perspective needs to be more, I need to get out of the snake pit. So, part of in this book, what they're trying to figure out to give some people an idea of the, not all the book, we still want you to read it. We don't want to read it for you. But essentially, this company that Ed wrote about, they're going through a crisis financially, and they realize that they really need this higher purpose and all of these things. So you could very well argue to this company shift in the book, they could have very easily looked at kill the closest snake, right? What's the closest snake? We're losing our revenue. We need more clients. Double down, cut costs. Is there anything that you found that helps people shift their mentality from immediate issues to, no, get out of the snake pit?
Well, I think if I'm thinking about in the story, all of those things happened, by the way. The CFO, the head of marketing, all the people like, are you crazy? In fact, his co-founder wanted him to, what are you, crazy? And there was a dream involved, and there's a lot of reasons that things come to him. But everybody was sort of fighting. And that was actually the point. I wrote that intentionally because that's reality. You can't go alone unless you happen to be Jeff Bezos, I suppose. But you need buy-in, and you need to think through how you're going to convince people to do something. And so, if you recall, one of the scenes, there's a conversation where one of the partners is making a pretty, strong argument why this doesn't make sense, and I think Andrew drops the name Herb Kelleher.
Mm-hmm.
And so Herb Kelleher, of course, was the founder essentially of Southwest Airlines. And all you have to know about Southwest Airlines is that they were the fastest growing and highest profitable airline for year after year after year. And Herb Kelleher said the business of, unlike Milton Friedman, who said something different, Kelleher said, the business is people. Always has been, always will be.
Yeah.
And they built this amazing culture, and it just paid. So I go there because I do think that when you can show facts, like all of the companies that are in conscious capitalism that are wildly profitable and wildly successful, sometimes data is really actually all you need. And so certainly that's one strategy. Then you can also, you can reach out to people based on getting to their heart. There are people that want to do the right thing. More and more people are purpose driven. And so, Andrew goes after that group as well. He also learned, as you recall, and I'll take a breath after this, that you have to choose all of your stakeholders wisely. So he chose the wrong financial partner. Okay. He chose a partner that was very short-term mindset. Why? Because the guy would give him the money at terms so that he could expand and invest.
Yeah.
He ends up finding a much better choice who believed in the long-term vision. So not everybody's going to believe it, but with a little more care, you can find the right partners, the right customers, the right, investors.
Absolutely. I want to get a little bit of insight into you writing this book. So even though, I think it's been 17 years since we've known each other, obviously we haven't had a ton of interaction. We re-engaged recently. We worked together for 2 years. I wasn't in all of the board meetings that you were in, but I did clean out the meeting room before and after a few times. But so I know you a little bit, but obviously we're not best friends currently, is what I'm getting to. Unless you feel differently, let me know.
I'd love to be your best friend.
Accepted. So, and that's how it's done, folks. No, but I saw so much of you in Andrew. And so I was curious how much, he's running a lot. He was not driving a Thunderbird, though, which I remember you drove at BNC. But I'm curious how much of Andrew was really you and how much of Catherine was Pat or somebody else, if you're able to share.
Thank you. There's a lot of Andrew, a lot of me and Andrew. If you went to the AO People Partners website, you would see that my favorite quote is "Misery is optional." That's a quote that appears in the book, actually not attributed to Andrew, but to his coach. So there are things you can't help but write. I found it inspiring, or you just go back to the things that and events that you have. I've had people do some of the bad things that happened to Andrew. I've had people do those to me. On the other hand, there's a lot of it's just flat out made up, and that was really fun. And honestly, Pat and Catherine Patty really isn't Catherine. So yeah, I think it's probably good that nobody ever asked that, but it's good to say there are certain things, but everybody's a bit of a mashup. I think it's fairly obvious, particularly because we have 21 endorsers, 2 of which are managing partners at Baker Tilly. So yes, Andrew's wife.
I was going to ask you who Will was in the book because I don't, he's a little blustery. So we'll let that one go to the imagination.
Yeah, please let that one go. But Andrew's wife is clearly inspired by mine. Let's just put it that way.
That's awesome. Well, one of the roles in here is Dave, one of the characters, and he's the coach to Andrew. When we reconnected recently, I said, Ed, I've recently working with a coach over the course of COVID. It really changed my entire mentality, changed my life. I just see everything completely differently. It's like the rewiring. My mind was just rewired. And one of the things that engaged us was you said, well, I'm doing coaching. You shared that you're writing the book. But you shared on our previous call that you worked with a coach for a very long time. And I'd love for you just to share, it's obvious in the book how instrumental that coach is to Andrew. And can you share what your coach provided for you over the years of working together?
Sure. So my coach, I mentioned earlier, was a guy named Dave McGuire, and Dave passed away, I guess, 5 years ago. I was with Dave almost 20 years. In fact, people would say, wow, you must be a real slow study if you needed the same guy for 20 years. But the beauty of it is, as you know, my job changed all the time, whether it's because we grew or because we did the merger and I had, 3 other different jobs and things like that. And Dave, other than Donna, my wife, was really the single constant. And, I like to say with Dave was the consummate thinking partner. There would be days where he would show up with something that he really wanted me to learn. But many times it was just, he'd show up, I would start talking. Dave was a classic. He was not much on the technology. Like, I don't think I ever got an email from him, but boy, did I get voicemails. This is not an exaggeration. I would come in, and I would have met with him on a Tuesday, say. I'd come in Wednesday morning and the light would be blinking on my phone, and it would be Dave would say, buckle in, this is going to be a long one. Our voicemail machine ran out after 3 minutes, and he got used to that. He goes, I think this is going to be 3 of them. And he would probably just, I was thinking, I slept on it. That's one of the things he taught me. Sleep on it. Very few things need to be so reactive, and that would be one thing he taught me. He taught me a lot about things like when people that I work with know I refer frequently to psychological contract. Sounds very fancy. But from a recruiting standpoint, what employers tend to think sometimes is, hey, you're going to want to work for me, so it's all about that. And you do the job and all those stuff. But they forget that it's actually a contract. When John shows up, John has expectations of Baker Tilly, Pearson Cutler, AO People Partners. Right. And if you forget that, it's broken, and things like that. So, but there were oftentimes, we would, some of the things Andrew goes through, we went through, business is not easy. And having someone up, very important point. Dave also, because he was there from the start of the professional development program at the firm, he knew the players. He didn't coach all the partners, but he was in the fabric of the organization. Catherine and I today, we have many enterprises that's the case, where we're just embedded in that, and we understand the DNA of the place. So when I was thinking about doing something, he would never violate a confidence any more than I will for coaching. But he could steer me away from something because I don't think you're really thinking about that very clearly. We did a lot of 360s, which we do in our practice today. I learned a lot about myself, and Dave was such an interesting guy. He was originally a priest. In fact, he went to a silent monastery in France for 5 years. Boy from Chicago. 5 years. And this is a true story. He says, after 5 years, you have to decide whether to stay forever or go home. He says, I like to talk too much. I went back to Chicago.
I was going to say, those long voicemails make sense now. He was storing that up.
He got a job in the mail room.
Wow.
There you go, John.
Familiar? Yep.
The mail room at what was then about the 5th largest bank in the country, Continental Bank. And Dave ended up being the head of HR at Continental Bank, which failed in the early 80s, but it had thousands of employees. And Dave then turned his sights on basically outplacement and helping people land on their feet, which led to all these other things. Really just an amazing human. And really, I tell people I'll take a breath here in a second, I promise. I knew for a long time that I wanted to do this kind of work. I just didn't. I figured I would do it at some point in my career. I'm inspired by people like Alan Alda, who are in their 80s and they're still creating. They're still doing generative. And so I had no doubt I was not going to stop working and trying to do stuff. And Dave was a pretty good model for me for, how I want to live my life and how I want to coach.
How did you first meet Dave?
A client of Beers and Cutler knew Dave, and I don't even know how they knew each other. And they introduced, it wasn't the way Andrew meets his guy. I made that one up, but he introduced us. I think he introduced Dave and Joe Courier, who was an organizational psychologist, to me and Jim, let's say probably 1996 or 7, something like that. So a while back.
So for people who are trying to figure out, should I get a coach, or the type of coach that they want to get, what would be your advice in finding the right coach for yourself?
I think the first thing, with coaching, there are all types of disciplines. And so there are career coaches, and there are life coaches, and then leadership coaches, which is what I do, and then a couple others. And so the first thing that I would recommend, I feel like I'm recommending, get 3. Before you get a roof, get 3 estimates. The truth is, whenever anybody comes to us and they're thinking about coaching, we always suggest it's personal. There are a lot of qualified coaches. Personal chemistry really does matter. And so, don't rush into it unless you may love the first one you meet. But, if you can get somebody to recommend 2 or 3 to you, take the time to interview them and realize that what you're really entering into is a talking, listening relationship. So you can't not like their personality, So I know it seems kind of obvious, but just because they're the best at something doesn't mean, or at least on paper. So I think personality is really important. I do think some people rely heavily on tools, things like Leadership Circle or Myers-Briggs. And so you want to find out if that's not your bag. Then if you just want somebody to talk to, so you've got to kind of find out how they do it. There is an International Coach Federation, and there are a number of universities. I went back to Georgetown, which was the first university that had a program. So I think there's some level, actually Catherine and I had a conversation early on in our partnership about whether I should, and I'm so glad I did. But so I would say, there are credentials. And so you should make sure the person, has been doing this a while and is credentialed. But at the end of the day, it does come down to what do you want out of it, and how does the chemistry? Can you trust them? Because you got to tell them everything. I mean, it's shocking the things that I end up listening to.
I didn't sign up for this. Yeah. So both you and Dave have transitioned, it sounds like, from full-time careers in business to then coaching. What advice would you give people who are in their career and they're thinking, you know what, I think what I want to do is add value to people, to coach, to share what I've learned. What is the best way to evaluate and then take that step into coaching?
Well, I'll tell you what immediately comes to mind for me was my process. It helps that I've been a journaler for a long, long time, and I like to write things down. And what happened for me was I was keeping journals, and after a few years, I kept seeing the same patterns. So that leads to a point, which is start thinking about this not when when your hair's on fire. If you can, start thinking in a little bit longer mindset about the things that you really, really like to do. First off, I was talking to a guy yesterday, and it's a very simple exercise. It's kind of funny. I just said, okay, just put a line down the middle of the paper, and over on the left, just make a list of all the things that you would say are must-haves in a job. And don't make it just about money or just about where, but what are the things you really like to do? Do you like people? Some people don't like people. So, yeah. And then the other side is can have. So if you're tired of traveling, somebody may offer you this great job other than the traveling part. And if you're not careful, you'll take the job and you'll continue to be miserable. So I would say being very intentional, kind of ties into conscious, but being very intentional, having a process of some sort. Adam Grant's book that's out right now called Think Again, he talks about doing a 3-year checkup all the time, on a regular basis. Have a 3-year career checkup. I don't know if I'm quite that prescriptive, but I do think that being very Yeah, very disciplined about it. It really helped me. And then it's kind of like it's like a good roast. After a while, then the meat just falls off the bone. And I knew I was ready. I didn't need, my period of discernment was over. I was ready. So you can't just walk around. I guess I would summarize with saying, you can't just walk around thinking, gosh, maybe I'm in a bad job, or maybe I should do something different. That's the start. Then right. You got to kind of do it. And it's for kind of ironic, because you asked me, how do you get into coaching? Having somebody, whether it's a mentor, a best friend, a spouse, or actually a coach, during that period of time can be super helpful too. I had Dave. I could run my terrible ideas by him, and he'd go, I don't know about that one. So I think, do the work, but also have people that you trust. And, trust is a funny word too. I mean, trust as in, not that they can keep your confidence, which is right. important, but that they actually have some skills, Right. Hey, John, you're wonderful, but I don't really want you to, remove my molars. I may trust you to talk to you. See what I'm saying? So having,
I think we're both aligned on that one.
Yeah, good. I'm happy to hear that, even though you're my new best friend.
Right. Now, when you were going into coaching, did you have any sort of conflict or complex, I guess I should say, saying, well, can I really tell people what to do? If somebody comes to me with their problems, do I have the answers? Or was that something that you were just so wise and so experienced that you just said, no, I do know the answers?
Here's the funny thing. So the dirty little secret of coaching is it's all about questions. So I always say that what? I think that, yeah, exactly.
I'm catching on.
Consulting, arguably is kind of like 80% advice and 20% listen, and coaching is the exact opposite. So there isn't a lot of me saying, go do this. But if I ask you what, sort of the literature would call a powerful question, I may lead you to the answer that I would give you.
Right.
But I didn't give it to you.
Well, and in the book, that's how Dave works with Andrew, right? He's always asking him those questions, and he's like, for once, could you just tell me the answer? He's like, Andrew, the way you figure this out is by finding the answer.
That was one of my favorite lines to write. It just hit me. I'm a big music guy, and I've always loved the band. And so the great song, The Wait, where, the man shook his head, grinned, and said, no, and so Dave says, no, was all he said, and it's, no, that is not how it works. So that's a really important role of coaching. But the other thing, John, you reach a point in your career where people do rely on, I have experience and I have skills. So my clients we may end up talking about acquisitions. I'm working with CEOs that, are in their early 40s that are growing their businesses, and they want to, hey, I have no problem giving advice, because that's essentially what I did for, 35 years before getting into this. So, but it's really important about coaching is everybody's different, and you need to draw out the best in them. Dave's style with me was different than it was with other partners. It should be. And yeah, so it's a really about question. I'll tell you funny. The other thing you learned day one at Georgetown is rule number one of coaching, which is just kind of funny and has a little bit to do with what you said, but not much. Rule number one of coaching, never coach anyone without their permission. That seems logical.
Yeah.
Rule number two, never coach your spouse, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, even with permission. So.
Well said. Well said. You need those healthy boundaries.
Yes.
Talk to me a little bit more about this book. What was your favorite part of writing it? For listeners, if it hasn't been obvious yet, the structure of this book is a fable. And so essentially what I love is it's sharing all these lessons, or I should say teaching all these lessons through a story that's very engaging. And there's parts of it where he's figuring out, he starts with his business kind of falling apart, got to figure that out, recognizes a higher purpose. I don't want to give too much away. We still want you to read the book. But what were parts of it that you just, the book was kind of writing itself?
Yeah. So earlier you asked me, was there a conflict with me feeling confident of giving advice?
Yeah.
No, that was not a real problem. I thought I could write. I thought I would like to write, but the flow happened. And so, I would come up here and, 6 hours later, I would wander out, so,
Wow.
So it was pretty cool. So I'm happy you think that it's reasonably good. And, so the whole thing was frankly very fun because see, one of the core capabilities that we talk about in the book is growth mindset. And I have it. I'm grateful to my parents for, I don't know why I have it, but I like trying and learning new things. So I was all in on it. I will say that thank you for keep saying people should read it rather than we tell them. But I think the thing that people, if I had to pick one thing that I came up with that was, I felt really good when I thought of it, was when I figured, I'm going to write about what's going on through the eyes of a reporter. So throughout, it was basically Andrew's story. And then a couple of times I was able to pull up and figure out ways to have other people looking in on what was going on. Mm-hmm. And that was pretty fun. And writing that, we won't give anything away, but writing that first article was hilariously funny for me to write. And just thinking about Andrew's reaction when he saw this article about him and a competitor, oh my God, I was laughing just writing it. So right. that was probably my favorite idea I came up with.
What was the hardest part about writing the book?
Oh, wow. I've read a lot of books on writing books, and most of them say something like Stephen King's, by the way, on writing. It's the best writing book. You'll laugh. You never have to want to write anything. Just read that book. You'll laugh so hard. He's really funny. But one of the things that people tell you is you have to write every day. You have to write every day. And that sort of gets in your head a little bit. And that the great art writers write every day. Well, I do have a practice. I have clients. I've got business, to help Catherine run. So the hardest thing was actually when I would spend all weekend, which is really what I did for a long period of time, working on it. And honestly, I would miss it on Tuesday because I just couldn't. So the hard part was the putting it down and picking it up. But it was a little bit like, when you've been with your best friend for a week and then, oh gosh, and now by Tuesday you miss them again. So so that, I think that was it. I would say the other thing that Catherine and I did well together, but it's always tricky, is having input into each other's sections. Was important. We had fleshed out most of the concepts. The big concept came out of her head, just to be crystal clear. But then working through what are the capabilities that we feel like people should have, and how to write the, some people say, wow, writing the fiction, God, that's the hard part. I'm like, I don't know. Writing 40 pages of how-to, and I think that's actually really hard, So we each had we were the right tool for the right job, but the collaboration on stuff like that, because you don't want to step on toes too much. But at the same time, you need growth mindset. You have to be open to other people's point of view, and both names are going to be on it. But I think the putting it down and picking it up was the hardest part.
Well, that's a good thing to have be the hardest part. You've really found something when it's easy and enjoyable, and you just find yourself kind of swimming downstream. One thing that was really eye-opening to me with the book was the fable concept. I used to read a lot of fiction. Now I mean, admittedly, I read a lot of articles. I read more short form things. I'm reading emails all day, I tell you that much. But this was great to get back into reading a full book and on the paper pages. But the other books I typically read are how-tos, or they're these business books. And this really opened my mind that, wait a minute, you can convey all of these lessons in a way where I'm just ingrained in the story and learning. I don't feel like I'm hitting my head against the wall like, oh, I got to read another page, or, was that something that you've experienced previously, or was it something that you and Catherine came up with that concept?
There's two major answers to that. So I knew, let me start with the second one first. So I'm looking over to the right. So Patrick Lencioni wrote 5 Dysfunctions of the Team, probably about 20 years ago. It's a fable, and then in the back, there's sort of, he breaks down. John Gordon wrote The Energy Bus. These are 2 that come to mind, which are stories. I would argue is probably the wrong one. I think this is like a fable / novel, frankly, because there's a lot more conflict and the characters are, a little more developed and such. But the idea of a very successful writing model being fable coupled with, kind of a how-to, right. I would say those are the principal inspirations for us doing it that way. The reality is that I have, because I'm been keeping track of all of these things like Misery is Optional and a number of them which we could rattle off if you wanted me to, but things I've been keeping track of stories on forever, going through the life of business. And so I told all my clients, I told the partners in my goodbye letter that I sent out that I was going to be writing. So and I thought I might do fiction, but I didn't really I thought it would be the second thing I did, honestly. I thought the first book was going to be kind of what you envisioned, of which I have about 30 over here to the right, which seems to be a very common and good. Many of them are really good, but they're kind of anecdotal. It'll be a story, it'll be, hey, this company, the theme is this, these companies do it really well, or these companies didn't do it well. And you kind of go through them, and there's just a lot of them out there. And I was struggling with how I was going to take Catherine's ideas and my ideas and blend them together and do it in that fashion. And then she came up one day, been a while now, but she said, well, you always wanted to write fiction. Why don't you just write a fable?
Yeah.
Like, wow. And I slept on it for Dave McGuire. I slept on it for a few days. And I thought, why not? And so that's it. I mean, in a nutshell, it's her idea. But I would say there are some really great ones. And the other thing, again, we'll see if it works, but nobody was doing it. Mm-hmm. Nobody's been doing this for a while. And yet, I don't know why, because those books I described have been super successful. So, so we'll see. It's, it was fun.
One of the rules of marketing is how you differentiate yourself, right? How are you different from everybody else rather than how are you the same? And it sounds like you found a great way of a kind of a time-tested model, but one that maybe it's trends, maybe there's other reasons, maybe it's not obvious to people to convey things through a fable, but you found a way to teach readers some valuable insights in a way that is very different than the other books next to it on the shelf. You did mention some quotes that you like to rattle off. I'd love to hear some of those. We have a little time, so lay it on me, lay it on the listeners. I want to hear some of these quotes that we can take home and think about.
Well, it's funny. We got press asked this week for something related to what's going on. After you left, I got tired of doing these.
Is that when everything went downhill?
Totally.
I thought so. I heard rumors. I just thank you for
confirming. It was. It just never was the same.
Yeah, I hear that a lot.
What I ended up doing, I got tired. Frankly, I got tired of doing the sort of standard annual review meetings, right? So I thought, okay, I'm going to completely rip it off from David Letterman. And I just started doing Ed's Top 10. That was my annual meeting talk.
Oh, awesome.
And so one year, it was like around 2008 and 2009, you can imagine the theme was sort of things I never want to hear again, like about the economy. But where I was going with this is that I was at the question, this is serious. So there was an HR media magazine asked us for an opinion as to what's going on right now with turnover, with recruiting challenges, with why can't people find people, and what are sort of progressive, companies doing? And it reminded me of this talk I was doing about client service. And one of my lines was avoid OSFA thinking.
Okay.
300 people were like, what? He's like, is this some Grateful Dead term? And what, because whatever, because people knew I was a deadhead. But I was like, no. So true story. I was in Nordstrom. I was trying to buy a gift for my wife. And I'm looking down. It's like, I know what S means. That means small. I know M is medium, large. What the heck is OSFA? OSFA.
Couldn't tell you.
One size fits all.
There you go.
And so my point to the group was, we can't have OSFA thinking when we're dealing with client service. You basically have to pivot. Actually, thinking of Nordstrom, they're great. They're great. They're a great thing with the client service, which is everybody gets a card day one. It says, rule number 1, use your best judgment.
Right.
Rule number 2, there are no other rules. So it was that mindset. Misery is optional is the one I certainly I use a ton. It's not really a quote as much as another thing that I like to say. It's really about communication, which is that the same sort of, I don't think it was the same speech, but I think it was about selling and communication. And I said, here's the deal. First off, smile. Seriously, it's amazing how many people walk around, just looking grumpy. You think somebody's going to want to talk to you, but what I said was, look, if your email is longer than the width of my granddaughter's hand, and she was 3, then you need to think of another way to communicate, because people can't remember that long. And by the way, if you're in the office, stop by. And it was just a little thing like that. So the idea that this is a Catherine quote, but I want to repeat it because I think it's in the book and it absolutely came out of Catherine's head, and she firmly believes it, and I believe it as well, which is that you remember it's one of it comes out in the fable, but it's to see everything and everyone as opportunities to learn. Everyone and everything are our teachers. And if you can have that mindset, by the way, Catherine's a Nietzschean Buddhist, so things tend to, her favorite quote is, everything's perfect. Our job is to find out why, which as an INTJ can drive me nuts some days, but that's okay. But I think that's a great mindset to have, that, I may not agree with you, but I need to hear you. I need to listen. And I can draw my own judgment, but it starts with listening. I'm going to learn something and I learn a whole lot more with my mouth shut. So I think I will do that.
Boy, that's a lesson for our entire culture to learn nowadays. Before I let you go, why don't you tell us 2 things? Number 1, who is this book for? So if you want to know or want to learn, who should get this book, and then where and when can they get it?
Great, thank you. There are a number of audiences, which is why I think, it'll be, many people will like it. I mean, if you are a CEO, or if you are a leader of a team, and you are thinking about a way to think about your business or your team, you're our core customer. It's the kind of thing that you could use in a team building exercise. You could build your HR culture, which then leads to the next obvious one, which is HR leaders, people that are members of SHRM, those types of things. There is an angle in here of purpose-driven, obviously. And what I know is that, as you said so well, and I apparently said to you 17 years ago, and it comes out in the book, we spend more time at work than anywhere else in our lives.
Yeah.
And so why not make it a place where purpose comes through, there's joy, things like that. So this should appeal, frankly, to people like you who are younger, who are growing their careers, but they haven't reached the pinnacle yet or anything. John, you got a whole lot more in front of you. I can guarantee that. So it does appeal to, millennials in a sense, and younger executives. So those are the primary three. I think if you like fiction, I guess there is a half possibility that a lot of people who might not think about picking up a business book. Mm-hmm. I'm biased, of course, but I do think the characters are kind of interesting, and you'll laugh out loud a few times, and you will see Andrew in yourself. There and others, but Absolutely. There's no he falls into all the traps that we all fall into, and evolves, and that's really the human condition. So so I think those probably cover it. All right. So the book is officially being released on September 20th, 2021. The publisher is Conscious Capitalism Press. It's available for pre-order now on our website, which is consciousincapable.com. So you can pre-order now. And it's also available. We go right to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Indie Books, Apple Books, and things like that. Bulk orders are always available.
There you go.
So we've got 6 weeks or so until official publish date, but that's where we are.
That's great. Well, I so appreciate your time, Ed, having an hour here to get your insights and share about this tremendous book. I really enjoyed reading it myself. Definitely encourage everybody listening to go out and get a copy. Buy one for a friend as well. You won't regret it. So, Ed Offterdinger, thank you so much. It's great to reconnect. I appreciate you being on the DLC Drop podcast.
John, I appreciate it so much, and I'm very proud of everything you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the DLC Drop podcast. This podcast is part of the Esports Futuri Podcast Network and produced by Innovation Media Enterprises. Make sure you subscribe on your favorite podcast channel and leave us a review.